our top kickers in fantasy football are still producing like running back ones and wide receiver ones in fantasy football heading into week 5. So that's exactly why it's important to go through kicker rankings every single week leading up to the fantasy week. And I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers that does it. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, dropping out to our first tier right here. Brandon Aubrey is still our number 1. At the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday night this week. Listen, with Brandon Aubrey, this guy is literally producing just as good as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy right now. Like, what he did last week, and I got flack for this because I said right before the kickoff, ironically it was on Thursday night, and these videos always come out on Thursday. What I said about Aubrey is like, this guy doesn't miss kicks, and ordinarily I'm right. Like, he rarely misses kicks. Obviously, he ended up missing one that night. But as you can see, like, this guy, other than one missed kick, has been perfect. And it's not just that. The leg on this dude is so long. And it's not even just that either. The fact that the Cowboys offense is kicking almost twice as many field goals as extra points shows the comfortability that they have in Brandon Aubrey. So against the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, a defense that will be good enough to shut them down in key spots where he can get a 40 or 50 yarder, I love Brandon Aubrey, as I always do in week 5. And at number 2, we've got Austin Seibert. Man, I cannot tell you how great it is to have another top tier kicker, because a Washington Commanders kicker right now is elite. Austin Seibert didn't even play week 1 for them, and he's averaging 14 fantasy points per game. That's how good Austin Seibert has been. And with Austin Seibert this week, he's taking on the Cleveland Browns at home. Listen, their offense is so good right now. It makes a kicker in fantasy football fantastic because, again, they're kicking just as many field goals as extra point attempts. And Seibert has been perfect on every opportunities that he's gotten. So with Austin Seibert, I just don't see the Browns. I've talked about it all week. Their reign of just ridiculously efficient offense in Washington, it will come to an end. I don't think the Browns are the one who end it, though. So with Seibert, I think they still get down there with efficiency, and they get Austin Seibert 3 field goal attempts and maybe three extra point attempts as well. So with Seibert, I've got tons of confidence in him in week 5. And then with Chris Boswell at number 3 in that match versus the Cowboys, it's really encouraging to see this because the Chris Boswell story is that he's always been a great kicker. The last several years offensively has been what has really screwed him in fantasy football. But with the Pittsburgh Steelers, not only do they have the ability to actually score touchdowns now, they actually are still getting you down there at a pretty good clip. He's kicking almost double the amount of field goal attempts this year as extra points. And it's sustainable. Like the way that Justin Fields looks with Arthur Smith, it actually looks really efficient. So I actually have a lot of faith in this one keeping up, especially against a banged up and battered Cowboys defense that's going to be even more unhealthy this week than they were last week. I like Chris Boswell a lot this week. Dropping out to our next tier right here, we've got Harrison Butker at number 4 in the matchup on Monday night versus the New Orleans Saints. With Harrison Butker, this year it hasn't been fantastic for him yet. Like, he's not a top 12 kicker as of right now. But I'll tell you this, the Rashee Rice injury I think is actually going to change a lot for Harrison Butker. I think the one guy guaranteed on the Chiefs team as far as scoring options to get more fantasy points, if not Travis Kelce, is actually Harrison Butker. Because I think they will stall out more on offense. And I think that will give Butker plenty of opportunities to kick long field goals. And against the New Orleans Saints defense that is very, very good, I actually like Harrison Butker's opportunity this week to kick maybe a 50-yard long and maybe 3 or 4 field goals in this game. I think he'll still be able to get extra point attempts because the offense is still great, but I do like the opportunity here for Butker. And then Moody at number 5. Jake Moody of the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Arizona Cardinals at home this week. Moody's been great too. Really, like, that first week was what kind of skewed his numbers really big, but he's actually been really good for most of the other weeks too. Like, the offense is running efficiently right now. They've almost got all pieces back except obviously Christian McCaffrey. And so with Jake Moody, I think the offense is running perfectly fine right now. And the Cardinals defense actually is not like terrible. So I think that in a divisional matchup, Jake Moody actually, I'm expecting to see more field goal attempts than touchdown and extra point attempts this week. That's actually what I'm personally expecting because, yes, the Cardinals just gave up a bunch of points to the Commanders. They had never seen Jaden Daniels before. They've seen Brock Purdy. It's a division matchup. Those are usually harder to predict. So I actually like Jake Moody's upside this week with field goal attempts. And then at number 6 with Jason Myers here of the Seattle Seahawks taking on the New York Giants at home. Jason Myers is in a situation where this week I think they have their way with the Giants. I really do. I think Jason Myers can easily get 5 field goal attempts or 5 extra point attempts and maybe a couple field goal attempts. I think the Seahawks are going to run up and down the field all over the Giants. I mean, they were extremely good against the Lions, and Jason Myers had a pretty good game in that game. And ultimately, I just think that Myers is the only question I have with him is accuracy. He's missed 2 field goal attempts this year. So with Jason Myers, I do wonder ultimately what his consistency will be like, and the missed field goals obviously hurt the fantasy upside, but this week against the Giants, I see the opportunity and I want in on it. Number 7 at the next tier here, Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans taking on the Buffalo Bills at home. I want options in this matchup. I think this is going to be a very high scoring affair. The Buffalo defense is very good, but so is Houston's offense. The Houston Texans defense is okay, but Buffalo's offense is going to come in pissed off because they just got crushed. I think that Ka'imi Fairbairn is in line for 4 field goal attempts and maybe like 3 extra point attempts. This is going to be a good week for Ka'imi Fairbairn. The only thing that keeps him a little bit lower for me is what if the Houston Texans look a little bit like last week where it's actually like kind of like a 20-20 type of game. I actually think it's going to be more closer to 27-30 type of game. So I do ultimately think that Ka'imi Fairbairn has lots of upside, but his floor is probably a little bit lower in this matchup. Younghoe Koo at number 8. Massive week for Younghoe Koo last week, and he's taken on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers tonight. And I've actually got Chase McLaughlin, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kicker, at number 9. So with these two guys here, obviously, Koo had a massive week. 20 fantasy points, depending on the format you had. Like, he did hit the game winner, obviously, last week. That was awesome to see. But he still is very similar to Jason Myers. He's missed 2 field goals this year. So, ultimately, that does limit how I feel about him as a fantasy football kicker. But against the Bucs defense, I actually do think it's a good matchup. The Bucs defense is not only that great, they're banged up right now, too. So, I don't see a ton of stops here for them. Ultimately, I think the only thing that stops the Falcons is them sometimes. So I think that Younghoe Koo is in a good position this week, similar to McLaughlin. I mean, McLaughlin's taking on the Falcons defense, who is probably better than the Bucs defense, but the way that Tampa Bay is moving the ball right now, it gives him so many opportunities to kick extra points. Like, that's been his ultimate problem, is that they're more efficient getting into the end zone and giving him less field goal opportunities. He's missed an extra point, which isn't great, but he's made every field goal, including a 56-yard long. So with Chase McLaughlin against the tougher defense that I think probably does slow down Tampa Bay's offense this week, I think Chase McLaughlin is another great play this week on this game tonight. I think that both kickers are going to be fantastic. And I'll tell you one thing that also is going to be fantastic. Watching Kirk Cousins get more than half a yard, which is his line right now on Underdog. And if you have not taken advantage of this line on Underdog, go to the comments, grab that link that's there, and use code FN to sign up for Underdog. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash, and you'll also be able to take advantage of the beautiful free Kirk Cousins line this week. Dropping down to our next tier, Evan McPherson at number 10, taking on the Baltimore Ravens in Cincinnati this week. Evan McPherson's been really good in fantasy. He's averaging 11 fantasy points per game. He's still got range, and I actually think this is going to be a high-scoring matchup. Ultimately, it depends on how efficient the Bengals offense will be. Now, based on what the Ravens did last week to the Buffalo Bills, you may think that the Ravens defense could shut down the Bengals offense just as easy. I think if it weren't a divisional game, that'd be true. The reality is Lamar Jackson struggles in division, and particularly Cincinnati has actually had a very good history against the Baltimore Ravens. So I personally think that Cincinnati might be very efficient offensively, keeping Evan McPherson away from a lot of field goal attempts, but I think that he may get like 4 extra point attempts and maybe a field goal attempt, which if that's the case, that could easily yield 8 or 9 fantasy points this week. So I like Evan McPherson, but I ultimately do think that the Bengals offense will be much more efficient than people really do think that they will give him credit for. Now at number 11 here, Tyler Bass in that matchup against Houston here. Tyler Bass he is what he is, right? Like, he's a mid-tier kicker, and he's typically not going to get you big games. But again, this ultimately comes from a belief that this matchup is going to be high scoring. I do think there's going to be a lot of scoring. So Tyler Bass, I think, is in good position to kick a bunch of extra point attempts. I actually think he's in good position to kick a couple field goals too. He's doubling the amount of extra points than he is field goal attempts, so that obviously indicates they've been more efficient offensively. But obviously last week, they got embarrassed. They're going to come out with a vengeance this week against the Houston Texans. I like Tyler Bass a lot this week. I think he's got good upside in fantasy. And then Blake Group to round it out at 12. Taking on the Kansas City Chiefs on that Monday night game, Blake Group is going to be fine. Like, last week was not, the past several weeks haven't been as great with Blake Group. This offense, though, is what ultimately worries me, because the extra points are so much more than the field goal attempts. It's like, unless they're getting in the end zone, Blake Group doesn't have a lot of field goal attempts. That's what keeps his upside a little bit lower. Now, I think that he's going to be in good position this week against an offense that Kansas City, I think they stall out quite a bit in this game because they just don't have all their guys. Like, they're ravaged with injuries. So I think that keeps Kansas City's defense on the field for longer, which could give Blake Group some field goal opportunities and probably some extra point attempts as well. So let me know how your team looks in preparation for week 5. And if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for this week, click on this video right here.